million dead, the majority of them Jewish. Yet at no point did anyone care to mention the realities of January 1945. No speaker mentioned the fact that, as Auschwitz was liberated, other ex-Nazi concentration camps were being used by the Soviet security forces to incarcerate a new wave of captives. Overwhelmed by the heartwarming concept of liberation, almost all journalists present avoided the embarrassing topic of just how limited the liberations of 1945 really were. No one disturbed the peace by saying that the Nazi SS was not the only organization to run concentration camps during the Second World War. And no one cared to tackle the thorny question of defining what the universally condemned evil actually consisted of. On the 9th of May 2005, major celebrations were staged in Moscow. President Putin played host to 50 heads of state, including President George W. Bush, and presided over a grand military parade. Leading the tributes to the immense achievements of the Soviet armies in their triumph over fascism, he declared that Victory Day marked a sacred date, the day that had saved the world. Then, standing in the same place where Joseph Stalin had led the victory parade in Red Square 60 years earlier, he gave the signal for the ceremonies to proceed. Thousands of troops, dressed in the historic uniforms of the Red Army, marched past or rode past. Martial music of the war period blared out. And truckloads of bemedaled veterans from the Great Patriotic War, elderly men and women carrying flower-wreathed portraits of the great Stalin, saluted the tribunes. It was all made to look as if time had stood still. No one with a generous heart could object to that moment of recognition for the veterans. They, after all, had made the greatest sacrifices of all the combatant armies. Yet few foreigners noticed the political sleight of hand that was being practiced. President Bush had made a telling point on the eve of his trip to Moscow when he had briefly visited Latvia, one of the 3 Baltic states which had been attacked and annexed by Stalin in 1940, and whose present-day presidents now felt unable to participate in the Moscow festivities. But, generally speaking, few commentators questioned the dubious historical assumptions that framed the occasion. They accepted, quite incorrectly, that the Great Patriotic War was just a Russian synonym for the Second World War, and as a result they were not prompted to ask what the Soviet Union was doing in the years before the Great Patriotic War started. They did not inquire too closely about Stalin's methods or Stalin's war aims, and above all, they did not object to the quiet elision of the 15 Soviet republics of 1945 with the Russian Federation of today. President Yushchenko of Ukraine, the leader of the latest ex-Soviet republic to slip away from Moscow's control, attended Mr. Putin's festivities. But Westerners were still so accustomed to mistaking Ukraine for part of Russia that they saw no reason to interest themselves in the fate of Ukraine in 1939–45 as opposed to that of Russia or of the USSR as a whole. President Yushchenko modestly did not make a show of the fact that his own father, a village schoolteacher, had been a survivor of Auschwitz, prison number 11369. Britain's celebrations to mark the 60th anniversary took place on the 8th and 9th of July 2005. On the 8th, Queen Elizabeth II unveiled a monument in Whitehall to the women of World War II, and on the 9th she and the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, attended a memorial show on Horse Guards Parade. This last nostalgic event betrayed a great deal about the narrowing of focus which has crept up in London no less than elsewhere. It took the form of a series of musical and comic items from the wartime repertoire linked by a historical narrative. The latter was read by the actor Simon Callow, and was interspersed with a selection of Churchill's speeches in which Timothy West impeccably impersonated the wartime leader. Hence, Bluebirds Over the White Cliffs of Dover alternated with We Shall Fight on the Beaches. And Flanagan and Allen numbers were followed by the theme tune from Schindler's List, by A Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square, and, in the grand finale, by We'll Meet Again. Don't know where, don't know when. As entertainment, the memorial show was well received, but as a history lesson it suffered from some obvious shortcomings, for it ignored the essential differences between then and now. Apart from very brief appearances by some Indian Army buglers and by a dance troupe dressed in American uniforms,